Boom. We're here. We're here. A little housekeeping. If you're listening, rate the podcast, share. We're trying to connect with you. That's what we're doing here. If you're just listening, you could watch on YouTube, Big Moo TV, Instagram, you know what the Instagram is, website, you know, all that. And I want to jump right into it. I'm excited for this story. I have my buddy Arron Moore here. He has a very particular life story that is compelling to me and super interesting to me. And I think it's an insight that, you know, I've expressed on here that we want to, you know, every experience represented. So he has an experience, and I want to share. I'm to share it, and I'm curious. Like I want to hear I want to hear the details. So introduce yourself and you know, do your thing.
All right, what's up, family out there? My name is Arron Moore, and I was asked to do this podcast by Eric. Eric's a buddy of mine, so obviously I agreed. One of the things is he heard me share my short version of my testimony at one point, so he wanted me to get into more detail, so I'm going to. All right, so let's do it. Let's get vulnerable. So as far as I can remember back, when I was about 4 years old is when it all started, and we had a family member, an uncle that was part of a church. He was a deacon in a church, believe it or not, but he was not a very nice man. You know, he also did a lot of other stuff on the side, and ultimately had created stuff with his sons. I don't want to get into too much of it, but it's just like real dark stuff. Not a lot of experience with that stuff out there, so I don't want to confuse people, but a lot of abuse is what happened. So, including rape. We actually were made to put in videos as kids and other things to create something in me. I don't know what they were trying to make me. There's a lot of theories and a lot of people from counselors and psychologists that I've been to, you know, that have said they try to make me an enforcer or try to make me somebody that could do something for the, you know, the group of people they were creating. Obviously, it wasn't part of a church. It was, you know, the opposite of the church. But, you know, a lot of stuff they had us do had to do with, you know, that type of worship, you know, just worshiping evil or worshiping whatever you want to call it. You know, I don't know what you guys call it out there, you know, dark universe. I don't know.
Yeah.
What everybody's opinion is doesn't matter. For me, my belief is it's evil. You know, it's just the evil of this world. So they did a lot of things. I mean, even some of the things they did for pain was obviously sticking needles under my fingernails, blew out my eardrums with Q-tips, tied me down and stuck needles in my balls, which is ultimately what the reason I couldn't have kids. So, yeah, some pretty bad stuff. I won't get into too many more details, but it happened for about 6 years, 7 years. From the time I was 4 till I got bigger, till I was about 10 years old. I went through a lot of stages during this, which is what caused my parents to send me to psychologists, counselors, I mean, you name it, hospitals, just, you know, I wore my mom's clothes. Obviously, for a while, I believed I was supposed to be, you know, with men, of course. And so that's the path that I was going on, actually, for a little bit as a child. Definitely very sexual as a child. Even with one of my neighbor girls, I was like 7 and she was like 4 or 5. And I tried to have sex with her. You know, I tried to have sex with my sister. Obviously, you could understand I was extremely lost. I was extremely broken. I didn't really know what I was supposed to be or do. So one of the days I actually wore my mom's nylons to school, like under my pants. And I remember I went into the bathroom to go to the bathroom, and some kid, you know, saw it. And he started making fun of me and all that fun stuff. So I just remember, the only thing I can remember is just immediately being filled with like all this rage. And I remember turning around and I hit this kid. as hard as I could. And I don't even know how to explain it. It's just like I was filled with this power, this understanding of, in that one moment, I had an understanding of what I was supposed to do with my life, and it just made me feel powerful, and it made me feel fulfilled. And all of a sudden, I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't this weak, scared child. And so I remember that feeling, and he kind of stumbled backwards. And then, of course, all the kids were like, oh, man. And, I was the cool kid now, and, all this stuff. And I just remember that was my journey, and then from there, the first somewhat hospital trip I made was one of the kids, my cousin, who I knew really well, had died at 10 years old, got hit by a car on a bike. And I wasn't really close to him. I didn't have much feelings, you have to understand, because of the things that happened to me. I didn't really have empathy, gratitude, or remorse. So I didn't have much feelings about it, but my sister loved him. And there was a kid at school that made fun of him. And I remember vividly, I even remember his name, which I won't share on this, but, and I brought a knife to school, and I attacked this kid, and obviously for a 10-year-old, there's a lot of craziness in that, right? A lot of people looking at my parents, his principals, yeah, really, wondering like, hey,
What's going on?
What's going on with your kid, So that's kind of where the journey started, and then, that took me to being kicked out of many schools, elementary schools. I got kicked out, ultimately to junior high. And then in junior high, I actually got jumped into my first gang, of course, so in junior high, nothing really changed. Just continued to want to fight, and here's the thing, I wasn't even that good, like at that time, I just wanted to throw punches, right?
Yeah.
Like I wasn't even, just, that's what I wanted to do. I just remember. And obviously I got noticed. And so I got jumped into my first gang. It was like, I don't know, COB or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but anyway, we were just kids, some of the older kids that came to bring us in. So I started that journey. And then I remember when my life really changed is I actually, at a church, I went there to play basketball. And I was playing basketball with this kid named Alex. And I remember we got into a fight, and he whooped me good, man. He whooped me good, This kid knew how to fight, and he was like 14, I think. And I was, like about to turn 13 or 12, something like that, 12 and a half, whatever. But I just remember he whooped me good, and so afterwards I started talking to him, like normal. I was like, hey, man, how did you learn how to, this and that? How did you do that? And blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, my dad teaches me and my brothers,
Yeah.
And so he's like, dude, you should come over, So I'm like, all right. So we became friends, I started going over to his house and met his dad. And, his dad was pretty gnarly. And I just remember, coming over there, and he'd throw me in the ring with the brothers and stuff. And, of course, I was just a punching bag, just learning how to do it one punch at a time, right? And but I loved it, it was just, it fulfilled me, and I loved it. So I just constantly was going over there, constantly. And ultimately that took me to working with Alex. And what I found out is Alex and all his brothers actually work for their dad, right?
Yeah.
Their dad was into lot of stuff, and not going to get into all that, but but he was into a lot of stuff. So ultimately what we were doing is like, going to collect things for him, like people that owed money, whatever. So started doing that at a young age, like 14, but I was good at it, and we were both good at it, and ultimately, on the side, because I was still pretty crazy, I was also doing robberies with other guys, and just constantly always doing something that gave me an adrenaline rush, it never stopped. And so I remember my dad, ultimately, when I was 15, he opened the trunk of my car, found guns, ski mask, weed, all this other stuff in there, and he kicked me out, that was the last time. He didn't yell, he just shut the trunk, and he's like, go,
Yeah.
So that was it, so I ended up staying with Alex and just got really deep into that world. Then ultimately Alex got killed, which I think probably if there was any kind of sensitivity or love or anything I had left in my heart, it was torn out in that moment. And so I went on a journey, and we went on a journey to find the guys that did it. And after that happened, I went really nuts, and to the point where I came home and I tried to grab my sister and punch her through a window and cut my thumb off. I mean, I was going nuts. Many more stories, but ultimately my parents decided to send me out to Minnesota to try to send me with my aunt and uncle who was a pastor. But you can imagine how I felt about church or, at that time. Yeah. So this was going to be a joke regardless. But yeah, I went out to Minnesota. It didn't take me very long to connect with the right people and ended up, working at a strip club with a guy named Jammer that owned the strip club. And, we were doing our thing, man, selling coke out of there, just back into the business, ultimately I did so much stuff out in Minnesota. They kicked me out of the state of Minnesota. Yeah, I told my uncle, they escorted me to the airport, had plane tickets, had to get copies of it, had to take pictures of me going on the plane. I mean, it was a whole event, So then by the time I got back to San Diego, is when, didn't take me very long to go to prison at that point, I had not done any serious drugs. The only thing I ever done at that point is smoke weed, But when I went to prison for my first term, which it was a big term, it was a home invasion and, bad situation.
How long were you going for?
My first one was 5 years, 8 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was a big term. But I went to my first prison term and it was in prison that I did dope for the first time, real meth. But as soon as I did meth in prison, obviously that was just my, that was like what I believed was the end all be all for me. Like, are you telling me I don't have to sleep? I can be hyper aware every time, all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like this was perfect for me. Anyway, but in prison, obviously I wanted to be with the scariest guys. So I hooked up with the skinheads, of course. Wanted to get noticed by them. So, my first term, I did a lot of work to make a name for myself because I wanted to be somebody in there just like I did out here, you know. I wanted people to pat me on the back just like I remember in elementary school. It just, nothing ever changed for me. I still wanted that power and, I wanted people to see me and, respect me and blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So, so for those of you who understand what goes on in prison, you put in work, you do what you have to do. And so I did that, every single day. That's all I wanted to do was be somebody.
Yeah.
And, so my first term I did, I did really well. I mean, obviously, as the more stuff you do in prison, the more points you get, the higher yards you go on to. It's kind of a revolving door, right? So, obviously, I was, I kind of worked my way up. And then from that point, every time I went to prison, believe it or not, I spent probably 50% of my 15 years in the hole, in prison. Yeah.
That's so how did that, I've had another friend try to explain that to me, but try to explain to people what it's like in solitary confinement. Like, what do you experience? So
solitary confinement, it's interesting, because you think like what's worse than prison? Well, prison in prison, So solitary confinement basically means you no longer have the freedom to go to the yard, have any recreational activity. You have no TV, you have nothing in your cell. Basically they give you books. There's no windows, no nothing, so you don't know what time of day it is. It's just it's you're isolated from everything.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because the irony in it is time seems to go faster.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah, because you have no idea about time, right? Like you have no idea what time of day it is, so you just figure stuff out. You get into this routine, like roll call in the morning, working out, cleaning your cell, eating, passing kites. Kites is like notes, talking to each other, communicating, and next thing you know, you're reading for 2 hours in your sleep, and you do it all over again.
Yeah.
So, and there was a point in time where I had an issue with the cellie, and for those who know, they know, he had bad paperwork. So obviously, I ended up single celled. They wouldn't let me have a cellie after that for almost 18 months.
Explain what bad paper. I know what bad paperwork is.
Bad paperwork is just somebody comes in that's either raped somebody, child molester. They just have bad paperwork.
Gotcha.
Sex with a minor. There's so many different charges. It just doesn't. There's a pecking order in there, right?
Sure.
So, but anyway, so everybody has to show their paperwork to somebody. It's just the way it works. And obviously, the ones that don't have paperwork, usually those are the big red flags. But there's always ways to get information. So anyway, bottom line is, so I was single celled for like 18 months by myself. I didn't have a cellie or nothing, So that was interesting. Definitely internal reflection time. Although I don't think I had the ability at that time to even. I just wanted to read books. So I just remember I read crazy stuff like the Harry Potter series, which is, by the way, phenomenal books.
Very good books.
Yeah, they're very good
Fantastic.
books. But I just remember reading like Swan Song. I would get all these big books, just so it
Yeah.
would take a lot of time, and they ended up being like really good books.
Yeah.
Like Swan Song is one of my favorite. But anyway, so so in and out of prison, I got out, and I would, I just got into that world as fast as I could. Get my dope, grab my gun, just go on that mission. Ended up doing collections for a guy named, some guy that was, bringing stuff across the border to make money. And then I was trying to be a drug dealer. I was a horrible drug dealer.
too,
I
buddy.
mean,
Me too.
it was bad. Like, I don't even think I don't think I ever made money, no
Yeah.
matter how much dope I had. I accidentally became a pimp, so that was
There you
hilarious. Just because I started, you know how it goes. Just girls start coming over, whatever, and next thing you know, she's like, "Well, hey, I'm going to this hotel for, I put an ad on Craigslist. Will you come with me? Because whatever." And I'm like, "Sure." So I'm like,
Now you're pimping.
yeah. Now I'm just like, and then her friends, and then so it just became this thing. It was so stupid, but whatever. I mean, it's part of life. But I just remember, I will tell you this. I remember, just so you guys understand, how bad it was and who I was. I'm just going to say these one things. But the last time before I got arrested, and this was right down the street. That's why I'm saying this.
Yeah.
I believe this is why. I lived in this place right down on Lincoln. Those little studios right there on the corner was the last place for my last term that I lived. And every place I went to deliver dope, I'd seen somebody that owed me money. $50, $100 didn't. I mean, just rat stuff. Didn't mean anything, but of course, me and my pride.
Yeah.
So I remember in Lemon Grove, I ended up, stabbing a dude right in front of the sheriff's station for $50.
For 50
It's like
bucks,
stupid, right? And then I ran into another dude, and I took him out into the alley, and then I ran into another dude that actually tried to rat on me, and ultimately ended up, So. Yeah.
Take your time.
I just want to make sure I should say this, but
Yeah. Take your time.
so ultimately, so I ended up lighting somebody on fire. I'll just say that. And and the really sad part, I think, is, anyway, so I was in a really, really bad place. But yet I believe God was still working in my life at that time. Because when I got arrested, it was for traffic.
Yeah.
Too much traffic going through my house.
Gotcha.
So I got arrested for possession and possession for sales. That was it.
Yeah.
I thought I was done yet again.
Yeah.
And then the last time in prison, of course, there was just this random, when I was single celled, I was fighting a life case already. And then there was just this random act where I got stabbed in the head, in the day room. And it was, I knew Spider, who was my next door to me. We played chess all the time. He was the shot caller for, all the guys, whatever. And I just remember it was interesting because, he didn't know anything about it. And neither did I. Nobody did. It was just this random thing that happened.
Yeah.
And because I, responded the way I responded, and yet again, there I'm fighting a life case and going to court. And I don't know. I mean, that did something to me. I think it was God's way of waking me up and showing me that I'm not invincible.
Yeah.
That regardless of what I think or what I feel or what I felt like I become to protect that scared little boy inside, which is what I was doing.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I became vulnerable again. Like that was the only thing that was going to break through my idea of what I was supposed to be,
Yeah.
And it did do that. So that's when I started thinking, and then the most interesting thing happened. I was going to jury selection, and the last offer they offered me was like 100 and something to life. I don't know what it was, but so obviously I said no. And then I was going to jury selection, and like they had a spit mask over me because every time they came with an offer, I would spit on the, and so they were, basically bagged and gagged me, sitting in the cell. But I just remember they showed up and they took it off and they're like, sign this. I'm like, what is it? And they're like, they're dismissing all charges. They're not taking it to trial. And so, and even then I was just like, all right, whatever, and I went back to the cell, but something happened in me at that moment. And I remember promising myself I was not going to come back here. Like, I'm done. I
Yeah.
need to be done with this. I didn't have like any spiritual awakening. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
I literally just was like, I'm done. I'm not coming back to prison.
Yeah.
So I started my journey. I got out, I paroled, and I remember, I burned all my bridges. So, my dad picked me up, but he almost didn't even do that. So he picked me up, and I remember I said, just take me to my parole officer, and I'll get into a program, And so I went to my parole officer, and I was like, yeah, I need a program. And he's like, all right, well, I can't do that, this and that. I'm like, cool, I'm not going to test for you. I'm going to go smoke weed, and then I'll come back and test for you,
Yeah.
And I got up to leave,
Yeah.
And my dad's like, what the fuck? What is this?
Yeah.
And I was like, it's all right, Pop. It's cool. I'm just going to go do that. So he'll have to put me in a program,
Yeah.
And he looked at my brother. He's like, "Is this right? Is this true? Like, is this really what's going to happen right now?" And he's like, "Well, technically, yeah."
Yeah.
Anyway, my dad, because it just shocked him so much. He had such a big fit. My professor actually is like, "All right, I'll get you into a program." So he put me into the VOA, which is like a homeless.
Yeah. Yeah. I've spoken there many times.
Yeah.
It's a great place.
It is. Yeah. I thrive there. A
Yeah.
lot of people. I mean, obviously, people still use and drink and all that stuff, but
Yeah.
I actually did well there. I got a job right away. I was selling custom and printed ink pens over the phone because it's the only job I could get, right? But it was a job, right? Get paid money. So, anyway, I had a pretty good routine there. I would, get up, I had to ride the buses and the trolleys to get to work.
Yeah.
So I had to get up at like 3 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, to get up to work by 7. And but I would do it, and then every night I come home for dinner, walk up to the gym, work out, come back, read a little bit, sleep, do the whole thing all over again. So I did that till I saved up a decent amount of money to go to a sober living. Then I remember going to the sober living. I relapsed, but I had it all figured out when I relapsed. It was good, man. I do my shot of meth in the morning, take all my psych meds at night to go to sleep. So I was good. It wasn't going to affect my life in a negative way, of course, until it did, and it got to the point where a lot of stuff happened. I ended up punching my manager at work. Which put me in a bad predicament if it wasn't for the guys that were there, because obviously I'm a 2-striker as well. So, but anyway, by the grace of God, again, the guys there just was like, no, they were just yelling at each other, and because he called the police. Anyway, but I was going back and I was getting ready to do my same routine in the morning, and then just something was like, woke me up again, and I'm like, man, I said I wasn't going to go back to prison. What am I doing? And so I actually told my house manager and told my parole officer. The most amazing thing that happened, my parole officer came and picked me up and actually took me to my job to talk to them, and then got me into Crash,
Yeah.
And so I went to Crash short term for 4 months, and I ended up completing it, and it was the perfect program for me. It was a behavioral modification program, and I needed it.
That's what you needed.
Yeah. So, so it was interesting. I went to this Crash program, and even through all that, I don't even know how to explain it. There was a moment where I got recalled. I was at a meeting at Crash, and a couple of the comrades had come to a meeting that we went to, and something happened, and we get all the politics. It's just politics. Don't worry. It's not whatever. But so they recalled me. They're like, hey, you got to come back and this and that. And I just remember I had a choice to make. It was the most interesting thing, because Ricardo, who actually works at that program, and he sat me down, and he looked at me, and he's like, I believe that we all have a choice at one time in our life.
Yeah.
Where whatever path we choose is going to be permanent.
Yeah.
So if you choose to go, it's permanent.
Yeah.
If you choose to stay, it's permanent.
Yeah.
And he goes, everybody has one. We just don't know what decision that is, whether it's the person that ODs, he's like, but just think about it, person gets prison for life. It's like, there's that one decision where they made the decision to go down this path, and it became permanent.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know if this is yours or not, but it could be.
Yeah.
And so I remember, so I chose to stay, and he took precautions and made sure I didn't go out walking, and made sure, just to keep, the safety of the place or whatever. But I chose to stay, and at that moment is when I chose to walk away from everything. And so I made the decision to do that, and by the time I walked out of there, I didn't get on social media.
Yeah.
I didn't go connect with anybody. I had nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nobody could find me. Yeah. And so I went to a sober living, and I just started my journey, and my journey led me to meeting a woman that wasn't in recovery, and we got connected really fast because, of course, I'm codependent, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
like the rest of us.
You needed to fill that.
Needed,
Yeah.
yeah. And what's interesting is she was just as codependent, so like I moved in with her right away, and her dad had given her this house, and we got married in a year.
Wow.
I mean, it was crazy how fast things went, and obviously that was definitely my will, but ultimately the best thing that happened out of that was she had me go to church. I went to the Rock Church, and I remember I got up there and Miles was speaking, and he was like, you got to remember, from the time I was a kid, I want to make sure you guys understand this too. I was so filled with hate and rage. Like, I don't know how else to explain it except for that was the only thing that made me feel safe.
Yeah.
If I was always angry and always hateful, I was always safe.
Yeah.
Because at any given moment I could protect myself. At any given moment I could scare somebody, right? So that was what I wanted to be. And so walking into this church, and it's like, I thought, oh, okay, I crashed. Like, I'm all healed. I'm all recovered,
Yeah.
But then walking into this church, it's like I remember distinctly having the exact same feeling.
Yeah.
Just being full of hate and rage. And I was like, these fucking people, they're all hypocrites. They're all, just started to just get on my thing. Yeah. But I remember, because I was codependent, and I'm trying to impress this girl, right? So I stayed. Right. Yeah. And I swallowed my whatever. And I just remember Miles getting up there, and he's talking about he was a, ex San Diego Charger, and, he had a, cocaine habit, and, all this stuff. And I was like, wow, okay, this guy's like
regular,
normal. Yeah. Like, he's just a dude, and it's like, anyway, I just started relating, and what was interesting is like, I wanted to go back just to hear his message. That was it, because it's just like, he just talked to us. Like, it wasn't like a sermon or fire and brimstone and all the crazy religious stuff. Right. It was just like, he was talking, and so I don't know, one of the times he did an altar call, and I ended up coming up there and just surrendering. It was the first time I think in my life where I said, okay, if you're out there, here I am, like if you're out there, God, and this is really you, then here I am, and I said, I need you to take control of my life. Cause I've done pretty much at that point what everything that I thought I needed to do to get better. But yet as soon as I walk into this church, I'm still filled with this hate and this rage.
Yeah.
And, so I finally surrendered, and then I went to this back room, and I remember they started asking me questions, and I was like, yeah, this is too much. So I just left,
I've done that before. In church.
So anyway, I just left, and the other thing that I always struggled with is pornography. It's been a huge addiction.
If a dude here is not doesn't think they struggle with it,
they probably do.
Probably struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you don't think you have a problem, you probably have a problem. Do. Yeah. But and obviously, with my pornography addiction, it also goes into my childhood, right?
Yeah,
so there's a lot of just gunk and evil that gets dragged with that addiction.
Definitely.
And it manifests in a lot of ways, like gambling. Oh, that's not that bad, so it's cool. Obviously violence was my first addiction, right? Of course, so it's like all those things are still a trigger. And then of course you throw drugs on top of that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just was dealing with a lot of stuff at that time. So he was asking me a lot of questions, and I didn't want to answer the questions. So I'm like, who are you? So I ended up taking off, but what's interesting is my life just kind of progressed, and I went to get a job at a car dealership, and how I did it, I went after it just like I go after my dope or my status in prison or whatever. And I remember going to the dealership and asking for an application. They're like, oh, we don't do that, everything's online. I'm like, nope, I want a paper application. And she's like, well, I don't even know if we have any. I'm like, well, can you go check? And they came out with an application. I filled it out, and I was like, hey, can I speak to a manager? He's like, well, the manager's really busy. I'm like, I'll wait. You got water and popcorn, I'm good. And I waited there for like an hour and a half until I could talk to a manager. But ultimately, I talked to that manager, the next one, and they brought me back Friday to talk to 3 more, So then they had to do a background check. But from what I was told, after 5 years, sometimes it doesn't pop up. So that's what I was hoping for. And sure enough, they gave me the job, So I became a car salesman, and thrived at that, of course. Learned how to sell cars, became top salesman for like 6 months in a row. And eventually they promoted me to finance manager. Wow. So flew me out to somewhere, Georgia or something, to go take classes. Like, it's
Yeah.
stuff I've never been through. You know,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
fly me out here, and I'm like taking these classes with all these other professionals, and I'm like, God, you guys are lame. You know, like, it's like,
Yeah.
but hey, you know, here I am. You know,
Yeah.
so I had to learn how to be all like, you know, professional and sell products and all this crazy
Yeah.
stuff. But it was cool, man. It was a great experience. And so anyway, I came back to be a finance manager, and here's the funny thing. You know, my wife at the time, because we had rushed, and I'll get into that,
Mhm.
but she was a nurse
Yeah.
making really good money. And of course, you know, as a finance manager, I was making really good money. So, but every time I went to work and I came home, something was off in my heart.
Yeah.
I did not like what I was doing.
Yeah.
I was putting in hours. Yes, the money was great. I've never been a thing to chase money,
Yeah.
obviously, because I was
Yeah.
like, this is not what I'm designed to
Yeah.
do. This can't be it, you know?
Yeah.
So I remember I came home and I was like, I don't know, I just feel off. This doesn't feel right. And and I remember this school of ministry they talked about. There was like a year-long school, and it takes you on this journey to get to know like who God is, and
Yeah.
you know, like creating a relationship, not just
Yeah.
religious. Oh, you follow these rules, or you go to hell,
Yeah.
or blah blah
I
blah.
think people
Whatever.
have a hard time with that distinction
Yeah.
in all spiritual practice is saying God or saying I believe in God or have faith in God as opposed to building a relationship with whatever that power is. And I think for me, in my like Christian experience, I got an opportunity to like understand that kind of consciousness and like build that relationship.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people miss that. There's a lot of people going to church but don't have a relationship.
Right. Right.
You know?
Yeah. That's the churches are filled with them. You
Yeah.
know, and they sit up there, and the worst part is they'll like point the finger, you know,
Exactly.
and judge somebody like us because, you know, we're addicts or, you know, convicts or
Yeah.
whatever. You know, and the reality is they have their own issues. They have their
Yeah.
own disconnects. They have their own
Let's
sin.
see
their
their
own-
search history.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, and
Yeah.
it's like, but the reality is it's so much easier to focus on other people than it is on your
Definitely.
own stuff, right? So we get the blessing of being able to do that, you know, because being in recovery and all the stuff, we
Yeah.
work on our stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's huge. You know, it's huge. So yeah, ultimately, so I went to the school of ministry, and I just started this journey. I started this journey to get to know the person that I was supposed to believe
For
in, that was
sure.
going to control my life, right?
Yeah.
Like I never understood how we could just like blindly go, okay, I believe in this, without going, okay, what are you about?
Yeah.
Why is this throughout history like the one thing that people try to attack all the time, right?
Yeah.
The Bible, Christianity, whatever you want to call it, you
Yeah.
know? So ultimately, my journey to get to know Christ and why he was sent and if it was even true,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
these things, right?
Yeah.
You want to know, right? It ended up taking me to Israel, believe it or
Wow.
not. Yeah. So, but ultimately, at the end of the journey, I can't tell you what happened to me except for my entire heart was opened up. All the hate, all the rage, all the leftover stuff was gone.
Yeah.
And I had this idea to create this business. I just wanted to give back and serve. And I had this idea to create this business, and ultimately ended up wanting to do it in real estate, you know?
Yeah.
And so I created this program called the Thank You Heroes Home Rebate Program. And we give back to police, teachers, nurses, firefighters, yeah, military, obviously veterans. And we give all these rebates back. We give discounts on every service from buying and selling a home. I mean, it's an amazing program.
Yeah.
We've been able to take homeless people and get them into houses. We've been able to sponsor Toys for Joy event,
Yeah.
which serves 17,000 families.
Whoa.
We sponsor Pete and Sue Marie that go down to South Africa and built a school of ministry down there. And you guys all know, or I don't know if you guys do know, South Africa is the most segregated,
Oh,
racial. It's crazy,
yeah.
right?
It's wild. Yeah.
And they went down there, and there's like one of the cities, like number one, or one of the capitals, like number one murder
Yeah.
capital in the world. And so they went down there to build a school of ministry and bring
Yeah.
people to Christ. And so we were able to have the blessing of sponsoring that every single month, so they could be down there and do
Yeah.
their thing. And this business has just been amazing. I mean, it's like a gigantic ministry, and it's in real estate of all things, right? Like an industry where people are like, you guys are car salesmen, you guys are horrible people,
Yeah.
you know? And I'm like,
No.
you don't understand. There's a lot of good people there. They just don't know what they're doing, you know? And
Yeah.
now they have some direction, and it's amazing. So yeah. So now I have this amazing business. I was married for 7 years. That marriage was mostly me doing my work. You know, it was 7 years of training of how to die to self, how to be in relationship, how to be
Yeah.
a man, how to step up and be in
How to
relationship.
die to self.
Yeah.
That is huge. I want everybody to hear that again and think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Die to self is do you want to be right or do you want to be in relationship?
Yeah.
Right. That's what it comes down to. So the reality is, for me being a kingdom leader, and being a
Yeah.
leader of my family, I have to die to self to make sure my family's okay, no matter what
Yeah.
I'm going through.
For sure.
And a lot of that has to do with, really most of the arguments you get into in a relationship, ultimately you forget about them in 2 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody asks you a month, hey, what was that argument about? I have no idea.
Yeah,
I can't even remember.
Exactly.
So the reality is you stay in a loving place, you stay coming from a place of service, and when I come from a place of service, I can get her back into her heart. Once I get her back into her heart, the fight's over. Right.
There you go.
So I learned how to do that. But, after 7 years and a lot of incidences, and one where she actually left me, and because I did have a relapse about 2 years ago. I did have a relapse because of a lot of things. I've had a couple, she left for 4 days at one point, just left me. And so I went out and I tried to find dope, and I was going to Carl's Jr. and like hit up these kids and ended up getting in a fight with the kids. And yeah, I'm still very raw, but ultimately what I was realizing is that I was starting this business and I was putting this whole entire marriage on my own shoulders, and I didn't have any help. The only thing I had is God to depend on. And as soon as I got prideful, which I did, and I'm going to be honest, I started making a lot of money, and hey, look at me, look who I am,
money, property, and prestige.
Yep, money, property, and prestige. And oh Lord, did God humble me, so
yeah.
I relapsed and I ended up at a program mopping and sweeping floors.
There you go.
And so, but it was amazing. But at that moment, when I was up there trying to get reconnected, my wife came up there, my business was falling apart. My mom had 7 heart attacks and she was in Germany and I didn't know how to get to her. And my wife came up there just screaming and yelling at me that it was all my fault. And she left me up on the mountain, I remember. And of course I was going to leave the program and I was going to go fix everything, right?
Yeah.
Superman, here I come, and I was walking without a shirt on down on like Verona Street, right? So I'm on an Indian reservation, which is, I don't know if you guys have experience with that, but it's not smart for, you to be just without a shirt on, mad dogging everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I remember this guy pulled up in a truck, and it was Matthias, one of the guys at the program, and he's like, let me give you a ride to the gas station. And I did. He's like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get my stuff from my house. I got to get out of there. I got to figure out how to get to my mom. And then I got to fix the business and da-da-da. And he's like, okay. And he's like, well, hey, would you mind if we prayed before you did all that? Right? And I was like, yeah, sure. Let's do it. So I remember sitting there praying, and it was just like everything got clear. And God's like, get back up on the mountain. Yeah. And so I looked at Matthias and I was like, hey, I got to go back up on the mountain. He's like, I think that's a good idea. So I ended up going back up on the mountain, and I remember going up to my prayer spot, and I was like, I was screaming and cussing. I'm like, fuck you, you're not here. I asked you to be here, and all this shit is happening. I just was yelling for like an hour. And then eventually I just hit my knees, and I was just like screaming for help. And I said, hey, God, I can't do this. I can't handle all this. I need to focus on me. I need to focus on getting back connected with you, and I can't go fix all this. So you need to take it from me. And probably the first time in my life I ever felt a real weight that was lifted off my shoulders. Yeah. It all literally went away. It's like if you could look at somebody just in agony, screaming at God, and then all of a sudden complete calm, complete peace, and complete freedom in that moment. And I was able to stay up on the mountain, and everything got fixed, except my marriage. My marriage lasted another 2 years after that, but something had broke inside me, and I just realized that she did not have the ability to take any responsibility for her own stuff, And through the rooms and through recovery, that's all we do. We 10-step,
personal
right?
responsibility.
Yeah. We're always like, hey, here's my part, and I apologize for it, and she had no ability to do that. And yeah, so it was sad, I ended up separating, and then, she ended up, just so you guys know, she ended up filing for divorce. Well, I said I was going to, but she went ahead and did it first. So I thought, okay, maybe she realizes like, hey, we're good people, we're just not good together. But no, she's she's on a vengeance streak. So she's suing me. She's got a divorce thing going. She got our company audited. Like a lot of stuff's going on. But in that process, God brought me Heather, which Eric knows Heather. She's an amazing woman, and she's probably one of the strongest at taking responsibility for her own actions and 10 stepping.
She does the deal.
She does the deal, man. And she does it with me, and she knows what works with me. And she's just an amazing woman. So it's like whatever God has taken away, he's always given back. And it's just like a huge blessing. And yeah, so my life isn't perfect. I mean, I was telling Eric last night, I have a sober living. One of the things that I decided I wanted to do, and God kind of put it in but my house manager didn't come back, and 3 guys didn't come back, and they're all high, and there's 1 guy high in the house. So right after this podcast, I got to go over and deal with all that stuff. So plus I got attorneys and lawsuits, and I got a child custody battle I got into because obviously me and Heather are 100% committed to each other. So so I definitely have a lot of chaos going on around my life. But what I do have today, my spiritual practices obviously is I pray a lot.
Yeah.
My meditation is I jam some Christian music. Usually it's Christian rap or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll just sit there and I'll meditate and I'll just surrender. I don't think about anything else. Like, God, take my life. God, take my life. God, take my life. I don't want any other distractions to get in there. So I just keep saying that over and over again. And it really works. And then, of course, surrender and prayer. So just so you guys understand about the sober living, I prayed if God, because with this divorce, I'm probably going to have to sell, some of the properties I have and all that stuff, just get rid of all of them. And I ultimately knew that, but I believe that God gave me the sober living. So I said, hey, God, if you want me to get rid of this and you want me to sell it, you need to give me a sign, like a strong sign. You know how I communicate, right? Yeah. Like it needs to be, like this is from you. And of course, all this stuff just happened last night. So,
there you go.
So I believe that's my sign that I got to go take care of this. And that's how God speaks to me, and he does. And even through all this chaos, I'm still in joy. I'm still in gratefulness. I'm grateful every single day because, having all these problems implies I have a good life, right? Having all these problems implies that I have a good job or, good business. And, so they're very, very, they're people would kill to have the problems that I have, right? So I just have to remember and stay in gratefulness for that. But ultimately, my life is being directed by God, and that's who I let run my life. And when I accepted Jesus and I understood who Jesus was and why he was sent, my whole life changed. I'll give you an example of how it works with me. I was at a CVS and I was out vaping and I was waiting to pick up a prescription. And I was starting to question everything about my life. I was like, am I really even following Christ? Like, do I really have a relationship with him? Like what if I'm just using him so I could get all these blessings, right? Like that's even possible, right? But you know how my mind works. But I just remember, I'm like, God, how do I know I'm aligned with your will? Like, how do I know that everything is the way you say it is? Yeah. And I was sitting there vaping, and here comes this homeless guy wearing military fatigues. I'll never forget it. And he walks up and he's like, hey, do you believe in Jesus? You know how some guys, some of the homeless are a little bit nuts, but I love treating them like people, so I always have conversations with them. And I'm like, yeah, actually I do, And I'm like, how about you? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And he's like, all right, brother. And he starts to leave. And then he turns around and he's like, do you know how that for a fact that somebody has a relationship with Jesus? And I was like, no, I don't. How? And he's like, their whole life looks different. Yeah. And then he just walks off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and you guys just heard my story, my whole entire life is different. Today I help and serve so many people, whether in recovery or, just people I run into or in my sober living or in my business, and I come from a place of love as much as I can. I'm not perfect, of course. Yeah. I'm still human. And so I get raw and I get messed up, but then God puts people like, Eric or Heather, or, people in my life that can point me back into the right direction and what works for me. And so today, not only do I not hate and I'm not full of rage, but I'm full of love. And I follow the only 2 things that work for me, and that's love God with all my heart and love others. So
there you go.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to end it, man.
Yeah,
man. That was tight.
Okay.
I knew you would do that. So man, that was a beautiful story. If you don't get anything from that, I don't know. You're not listening. Yeah. So thank you, Arron.
You're very welcome.
We'll just mic drop that shit.
Okay.
Listen, rate, subscribe, and that was Arron Moore. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, buddy.